Andy Storch. I am author of the book, Own Your Career, Own Your Life, and I'm on a mission to inspire more people to take ownership of their careers, live intentionally, and prepare for the future. I do that through speaking, training, consulting with big companies. I'm also a husband and a father of 2 kids, and I'm obsessed with the idea of getting the most out of life and inspiring other people to do the same.
I love that, because obviously that involves a lot of learning and learning cluster design. That's why we're always here, is trying to figure out how we can make the most of our lives, not just through one thing, but through everything. So I love that. I am really curious about this guy. When did this come out?
The book came out in November 2020.
This is like almost kind of a relatively new baby, like a 1.5 old baby.
About a 1.5 since.
What was the why behind this for you? What's like the origin story? What sparked all of the Own Your Career?
So I came from a background of in consulting, and through that I had the opportunity to travel all around the world working with large companies, especially in the technology space, but lots of different industries, managers, executives, teaching strategy, finance, leadership development, things like that. And I met a lot of people, and I observed a lot of what was kind of going on out there and how people were operating through their careers. And I noticed a lot of people were really kind of drifting through their careers, operating in reaction mode, waiting for other people to tell them what to do, whether it be their manager, the leader in their organization, their parents, right? Like what they should be doing next. And that doesn't mean they weren't necessarily successful, right? People were sort of getting promotions and moving up the ranks. But I think a lot of people sort of wake up at some point in their career and wonder, like, what the heck have I been doing for the last 20 or 30 years, right? Never being really intentional about what they're doing and where they're going. And I also noticed that, a lot of people are really not that happy or fulfilled in their careers and what they're doing, right? And as I was going through my own journey of self-discovery and personal development, which really started in earnest around 2016, I did a lot of inner work to discover who I was and what I wanted to be. And for me, it was entrepreneurship. I discovered I truly wanted to be running my own business. But I knew that was not a fit for other people. There's a lot of people who have no interest in that, right? But what I think most people do want is to be happy and fulfilled in their career, whatever it may be. So I wrote this basically to create a guidebook for people to find that happiness and fulfillment in their career, to truly own it, and use a lot of the lessons that I learned as I was trying to figure those things out for myself.
Yeah, I love that, because there's something that really stands out to me about the title in particular, and it's this word own, because I've run into this a lot, and I'm really curious your thoughts on this, where there's so much you talked about, and just even your origin story, where I feel like a lot of times it's easier for people to have someone else guide their tough decisions for them than to own it, to have the accountability to figure it out, and for it to be, so I've almost come across a fear of owning your own vision for a life, and it's almost like, oh, well, if I follow this because someone else told me to do it, I can blame them if it goes wrong.
It's not our fault, it's not our responsibility.
It's like, oh, well, my parents told me to be Indian person, right? My parents told me to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. It wasn't that fulfilling, but my parents made that decision for me, so right? And I think I started really realizing as I got older that a lot of people have almost a fear of freedom. They have a fear of their own personal freedom, their own ability to make their own choices. And I'm just curious if you've come across that, and
it's the victim mindset that a lot of people get set in and almost get addicted to, right? Because of what you said. It's easy to, and it almost feels good in the moment to complain about your situation or what other people are making you do. It's what our kids do all the time, right? Oh, my parents made me do this. But you keep that going, and I had no choice in the matter, so I just had to do it. And you hear it in people's language all the time, and I'm a big believer in the power of language and the words we use. And people say, oh, I have to do this, not even realizing they're kind of giving up their free choice and will in life. It's almost like we had this thing scheduled, and if I tell someone this morning, oh, I can't do this thing over here because I have to go talk to Crystal, no, that's not actually true. I'm choosing to come over here. I accepted this invitation because I want to come talk to you. No one's making me do this, right? And I'm owning this because I want to take full responsibility for everything everything I'm doing in life. Now, that's a big responsibility, right? Because then we have to come to grips with the idea that we actually manage our own time. We're in charge of like how we manage our time, what we do each day, where we go to work. Like, why do you go to work where you work? Oh, well, I have to because my boss says, or they pay me to. But like, if you live in the United States or anywhere in the like free Western world, like 80-90% of the world with democracy, like you can go work somewhere else if you want to, right? It's not always that easy, right? But you are choosing to do what you want to do. You're choosing to be here right now, and we appreciate it, you know, those who are here, right? And I think a lot of people don't realize that, but what they also don't realize is there's a lot of power and fulfillment that comes with ownership. When you truly own every situation and your position in life and your career, and you say, even though I got passed over for that promotion, well, let me take responsibility for that and think, okay, what could I have done differently, right? How could I have like positioned myself better for that? Could have I asked my manager for more feedback, right? Could have had better conversations? Could I have taken on another project instead of just blaming, oh, they don't understand me, they don't get my strengths? Like, did I ever go and have that conversation to see if they did? And I find there's a lot more fulfillment that comes with taking full responsibility, taking ownership of your situation, whether it's a job situation, personal situation, right? You're having disagreements with your spouse, a relationship issue. Like, maybe they're not acting the way you want them to, but like, what could you be doing, right, differently? Same in health and anything else, right? It's about taking full responsibility.
Yeah, I think that's so crucial. Like, I feel like that's such a big philosophy of mine is whenever something is wrong in my life, the first thing I look at is what's my own contribution to this situation. Because I don't like feeling out of control or feeling like I'm giving up that power to other people. And so it's like for me to pivot and switch that thinking of, oh, well, this is happening to me. I always want to know, well, what's in my control to change? And I love that because it's so much more empowering. And I almost feel like I get very turned off in conversations with people who stay in this cycle of, this is happening to me, I have to do this, or I'm dissatisfied and it is what it is.
You want to know what the language shift is? Instead of this is happening to me or life happens to me, it's life happens for me. Everything happens for you. Everything happens for you. Even the challenges, even the worst things, right? And sometimes it's hard to see that. But, you know, we all went through some very challenging times with COVID, right? What if that happened for us to come to the realization? Like for me, it shut down my whole business, but then I was able to pivot and publish this book and make some big changes, right? And it created new opportunities. I'm a big fan of turning challenges into opportunities, right? So if we can see everything that happens as happening for us, then we can ask the question, well, why is this happening? Instead of like, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening for me? What opportunity is this creating? And how can I take advantage of it?
I love that switch with the for me, because that's what breaks through that fear of freedom. Because that fear of freedom, that fear of me owning this and therefore it's my fault if this doesn't work out, if you stop looking at it as this isn't going to work out, I think that's a big shift. It's whatever happens is happening for me, and that can always be an opportunity. There's always an opportunity in anything challenging that happens. So I think a lot of people get hung up on a good thing happening versus a bad thing happening, and I'm like, who's telling you if it's good or bad?
There is no good or bad. It's all relative.
I love how you and I, that's exactly, who's measuring that for you?
Right? Like you lose your job, you get laid off. Is that good or bad? Like most people would say like it's horrible. But what if 2 weeks later somebody offers you a dream job that you never would have been open to if you didn't lose that job in the first place and start looking around? You would have been like, nah, I'm sorry, I already got the job. You never know what's going to happen, right? There are certain things that we all agree are bad, right? Like murder or whatever, right? But like there are a lot of things that are really up for interpretation.
Yeah, so I know that you're a great storyteller. You've got a lot of great stories in this book, and you've interviewed a lot of people. I'm curious, I know there's got to be so many, but is there any that pop into mind that personally impacted your view on your own career, your own life? Like a message that, might have really hit home for you?
Yeah.
There's so many, yeah, so many people I learn from, whether it be people in my life and even, other authors and speakers that I follow that like barely know or don't even know who I am, right? I think we can have mentors everywhere, right? Just came from a keynote listening to Jay Shetty this morning, who is like an inspiration and mentor to many people. He doesn't know who they are, right? I have his book. Thinking about the responsibility thing, there's one leader I wrote about in my book who is the greatest leader I ever worked for. Her name's Jessica Parisi, and she's the global CEO of a company called BTS, where I used to work. And there's a couple different points in my life where she had a big impact for me. Number one was early in my career, and this was just kind of random. We were in a meeting, and she just introduced this concept that she learned about, of this idea of taking full responsibility in every situation in your life, no matter what happens. To like challenge yourself to just take responsibility for the situation, right? So I remember like the example at the time was like, you leave on time for a meeting, but then you run into traffic, there's an accident or something like that, and it causes you to be late for the meeting. And most people would say like, blame the traffic and this and that. Like, well, if you really take responsibility, you ask the question like, what could I have done? I could have left earlier, right? And accounted for the fact that like there might be really bad traffic on the way, and accounted for that. And what else can I do and take full responsibility for? Because it doesn't really do any good to be blaming other people. The second thing was I got to a point in my career where I was working in a job that for a company that I loved, but I was really struggling because there were aspects of the job that just didn't fit my strengths. And she actually sat me down, took me out to breakfast one morning, and recognizing the strengths that I have, and created a whole new position for me that set me on the path to get to where I am today. And I'm so grateful for her for that. She is the ultimate multiplier, I think, to use language from Liz Weissman, who wrote the book Multipliers, that I'm a big fan and certified facilitator of. And I always look for those opportunities to compliment and call other people out on their strengths, and also recognize my own strengths and use those in my career. And what I think, and I talk about this in the book, the foundation for owning your career is self-awareness and self-reflection, which leads to self-awareness, right? And a lot of people don't take much time for that. They don't really get to know who they are and what they're good at, what they're not good at, like how they can position themselves better to have a more fulfilling career. And the strengths aspect of that is actually funny, because I think most people are pretty aware of their weaknesses, or what they think are their weaknesses, right? A lot of people don't really admit their strengths because they just assume that if I'm good at something, probably everybody is good at that. But it's not true, right? Like, we talk about this stuff all the time, and you see, like, Jen, I see what you do with marketing, and like, I could never, it's amazing what you do, right? And other people recognize that, but you just think like, oh, I'm just doing my thing, everybody can do this. But when we recognize our own strengths, then we can start to build a career that utilizes that more, and I think that leads to more happiness and fulfillment.
And I think realizing that that's dynamic, like your strengths change over time. I think that's really pretty incredible.
Yeah, true.
For that not to be a static conversation or dialogue for people. I think those are a lot of nuggets. I remember early on in my career, a manager told me that nobody's going to care about your career as much as you are.
That's right.
And that really makes me think about a lot of conversations I've had about Gen Z employees who are it's not just Gen Z, but overwhelmingly waiting for someone to, promote them, give them the job or whatever. And it's like, I feel like everyone needs to hear this message of you own your career. No one is going to care about it as much as you do.
Right.
You have to be your number one thinker, reflector. No one's going to figure out your strengths for you or tell you what those are.
Right.
You can ask for that feedback. Right. They can help you. They can provide input. But you ultimately have to be the one to reflect and understand that. And also, as you grow in your career, understand how your strengths are shifting and how something that might have served you earlier may not be serving you now. Sure. So speaking a little bit more on the journey piece, is there anything that you've noticed about talent development professionals in particular with kind of their journeys and any thoughts you'd have to share or advice or...
So talent development professionals.
I think we're an interesting breed.
Yeah, community I love. I think one of the biggest challenges for talent development professionals and the hardest is that people in this profession tend to be such givers. They want to help everybody around them and help everybody in the organization develop, and they forget to take time for themselves. They forget to develop themselves. Now, we're at a conference now with a lot of people who are taking time, right? But I bet many of them still feel like they're here out of obligation. I got to run to this session and that session. But taking that time for self-reflection, or the number of times that I used to run a lot of workshops, right, in business simulation. The number of times I've seen the HR and talent development people in the back working email while everybody else is in the program. And they're like, oh, no, I still have to get these things done. And it's like, why aren't you in this program? Why aren't you taking time for your own development? And it's almost like I feel like they don't feel like they're worthy, or they got...
Why aren't they? Like, tell me, because we do all know that. Like, that is like, you know, pot calling the kettle black. We're always like, everyone in our organization needs to develop, but not me.
Right.
Right?
Because they're the Sherpas, right? You see yourself as the Sherpa that is going to help everybody else get there, which is fantastic, right? They need you. But also, you're going to be a lot better at what you do if you take the time to develop yourself, right? It's the old, adage of the lumberjack sharpening the saw, right? That Stephen Covey told in the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Abraham Lincoln talked about it 200 years ago. You know, the lumberjack who takes time to sharpen their saw will cut down more wood than the lumberjack who's cutting, straight all day long, right?
Yeah. I've thought about this a little bit, about how there's almost a perceived productivity with like doing. And I think this goes across many professions, not just talent development, but I just keep thinking, why don't talent development professionals take the time to develop themselves? Yeah. And I think it's almost like this false security of, if I'm checking off all the boxes on my to-do list, I'm doing my job. Yeah. And I think there is a really important element missing when you don't stop. But I think that's I've noticed that, like, if you don't stop, how is that hurting your real productivity? Like, there's like a perceived productivity and like a productivity in the
I'm
real.
Busy, right?
Right.
They're busy versus actually getting things done.
Like, anyone can be busy.
Anybody can be.
You can be busy. Like, yeah, busy is almost like a state of just normal.
Oh, going back to the owning, like, you own your time.
Yeah.
Number of people I get on calls with, they're like, thank you so much. I know you're really busy. I'm like, we're all busy. Like, what are you doing? Sitting over there doing nothing? Like, everybody's got stuff to do all day long. But we get to choose how we spend our time, right? And I'm choosing to spend it with you. And so let's talk.
It keeps going back to the owning piece. Yeah. I think when you don't really see yourself as the owner of your career, the owner of your life, you let these other tools and things like dictate your time and your energy, no matter what profession you're in. And it's really, you've got to step up with that accountability to really then say, well, I'm going to make these choices.
Yeah. Well, the same thing with people like being in meetings all day long, all week long, right? A lot of times you don't have to. Yeah, there was a point when I realized that. And the busy thing, too, I remember, I don't know if you're familiar with the book Essentialism by Greg McEwen. When he came out with that book, I happened to go to a talk of his in San Francisco, and he talked about that, like, people using that word busy as a badge of honor. And I decided I would never use the B word again after that. People ask, how you doing? Oh, busy. And I was like so proud. Like, no. Like, I'm, this is what I'm working on, so I'm doing. So you think about that, and then you see people running like their meetings all day long. They can't ever take time for anything. But how often could you possibly decline that meeting or take a shorter amount of time or that sort of thing? Like, start to really own your time and how you're spending it.
Yeah, and you know that I recently had a child, and I think parents have like better excuses, but they're still excuses. Yeah. For owning your career and owning your life. Right. Like, I think there's still things, because I realized, like, all of a sudden my own level of standard for myself almost tripled when I became a mom, because I wanted to keep up everything the way that I was doing it. And I kept thinking I was dropping the ball, when actually I was more on top of it than ever, because I was like over trying. Yeah. And so then I started realizing, I was like, I can back off from this. Like, I used to be so intentional about, I'm going to have meeting free days. because I'm a very immersive worker, like I do a lot of creative thought leader stuff, so I need the immersive time. And all of a sudden I went, and I also have this like precedent, I don't get back to emails within, it's like give me 24 hours. I'm not like an hour and I'll respond. And I've always had that pre-pregnancy, but post my child coming, all of a sudden I feel like I'm dropping all these balls. So I became this instant responder, and this like meetings, I like accept. And then I was like, wait a second. Just because I'm a parent, I'm overcompensating. I don't need to think I'm dropping these balls. I can back off, and I can, exactly. And so I just feel like the excuse gets better, but it's still an excuse too. Because I've had a lot of these talks with parents before I was a parent, and I was like, but what are you saying yes to that you don't really mean? And that's a Peter Block question. It's like, what are you saying yes to that you no longer mean? Start saying no to those.
It's the same thing as like you ask people about their priorities and values and then look at their schedule and like, does it match, right? So like I say family is important to me, but do I spend time with my family? And I set boundaries, and I have 2 kids, and we have dinner together every single night, and I don't take meetings after 6 o'clock. And I love telling people that if they try to book a meeting with me, it doesn't happen that often, but if they do, I will explain it, because I feel like it gives other people permission to do the same thing. Like, oh, he's doing that, maybe I'll do the same thing and actually have dinner with my family tonight.
I had someone just tell, I now have 2 meeting-free days a week, which Jen knows. I have these 2 meeting-free days, and I was telling someone else how my husband and I are working this out, where I have 2 meeting-free days, he does, and the skepticism, they were like, does that work?
Yeah.
And I wish because of the skepticism, I was like, yes, it does. But I wish I'd been like, hell yes, it does. Because it really has been working pretty well.
Yeah.
And so, I just think that's really interesting. This just made me think of this thing around continuous learning. So I'm thinking about talent development professionals, them not investing in themselves. And again, this goes to good excuses. A lot of people I see, they're like waiting for their company to give them permission to invest in their own learning. What would you say to that? And like, when you were transitioning, how did you decide, or what did you decide to invest in personally versus like wait around for, I'm waiting for the training dollars or for my company to send me, or to take the time off, or outside of my work time, I don't want to be doing, like, how do you?
This is so huge, because if you work for a big company, you might be lucky in that they do provide a lot of great resources, but you need not wait. You shouldn't wait, because the pace of change is faster than it has ever been before, right? And yet it's slower today than it's going to be. Like, things are continuing to speed up, change all the time. Like, the days of getting a college degree or a master's degree and working in that field for 40 years, like, those are over, right? Like, we need to be staying up on the latest trends, learning, and there's so many opportunities out there. There's no shortage of opportunities. So for me, I mentioned I started my personal development journey in 2016. I really started diving into a lot of reading a lot of books. I listen to a lot of podcasts, going on LinkedIn and learning from other people every day, taking online courses, hiring coaches, joining mastermind groups, going to conferences. Like, I do all of those things on a regular basis, joining online communities, like membership communities, where you can learn from other people doing similar things. And all of those things have benefited me so greatly, and I'm such a big advocate of that. They require you invest either time or money or both, right? And a lot of people feel like, well, if I'm going to be learning, like, my company's got to provide it to me. But you can take ownership of that. You can do that yourself, right? You can go buy a book. You can go buy a course. You can, when I published this book, it was a culmination of lots of learning I did. I also hired a mentor and bought her online course and invested in a lot of other things to make sure I did it right, and was able to like publish the book and get it out there the right way. I wasn't just going to try to wing it. I want to learn from other people who are doing it, and I think we have an opportunity to do that in so many different areas.
Completely. I'm so resonant with your philosophy on things. When I'm sitting there and I'm trying to learn something new or make a transition for myself, or even just if I'm bored, right? I want to figure out what's the shortest way for me to get like this much learning. And so a lot of times it's reaching outside my comfort zone, finding people who are already doing it, talking to them. Even if it feels weird to like cold message them on LinkedIn, who cares? The worst that can happen is they say no, or they ignore it. I mean, big deal. If I when I wanted to get into public speaking, just contacted ATD chapter, spoke there, then I applied to speak at a TEDx. They said yes, and then I basically peed in my pants for like weeks on end and then did it, right? And now I'm a TEDx speaker, 2-time. because then the second time I was already a keynoter by that point, right? But it's like, I think a lot of times people think investing in learning, again, excuse, I have to wait for someone else to give me permission. No, it's your life. If you want to get better, find, if you've got to like figure out the shortest path to it because you don't have a lot of money, time, go do that. It's out there.
Find somebody that's done it. If I want to figure out how to win an ATD award, I'm gonna call David. I'm gonna call David. I think first and foremost, it starts with the foundation of self-reflection, self-awareness, like taking that time, in a quiet space with a journal and a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, and, at least half an hour, maybe even that half an hour a week to think about who am I, where am I in my career, what do I like and not like, what do I want to change, what are the things that I've been learning recently that I want to implement and put into practice, and then start to think about what are the things that, where do I want to get to, what's my vision for what I want to get, and if you put a plan together, what are the things that are going to help me get there, right? And most likely, I think there's going to be some combination of learning, right? Do I need to get certification or, read a book or look at the latest trends? And networking, right? Like, I think there needs to be an element of networking in there, whether it's maybe it's reaching out to one or two people a week. I want to become a director of learning and development. Maybe I don't even work in L&D. Start reaching out to people who work in that role, right? On LinkedIn and in your company, whatever, and try to schedule 2 conversations a week. For me, and it depends on personality style. Like for me, I'm more of an extrovert. I think I learn more from other people. I read books every day too, but I want to have a conversation with somebody who's been doing it and ask them questions, and I know I'm gonna learn a lot from that situation. So I'd be spending a lot of my time doing that. But it also depends on what you want to achieve, right? It's very dependent on that. You could also be doing work on your mindset. You could be building your personal brands, right? But I think starting with self-reflection and having a plan in place for what you want to do, and then just continuing to follow those steps.
Yeah, I want to highlight something you're saying, because there's something important there of not having the plan right away, but taking the time for the self-reflection. And, I used to be a career coach. I've worked a lot with people on this sort of thing too. And it's a lot of people, when they start making that transition and setting aside 2 hours a week or whatever, they're afraid of the nothingness. And not having a plan, when actually that's really what you need, because otherwise you make these anxiety-driven decisions because you're still in your doing mindset. So I think getting really comfortable for a minute there, just journaling and self-reflecting and spending that adequate time in that nothing space, I think is so important.
People set goals based on other people's goals, right?
Exactly.
Take the time.
If you create a plan right away, that's all you're going to end up doing. Is it's going to be based around what you already know, which is from all these external sources. You need to take that nothing time to go inside. And I think, there was a piece you were just saying about the plan and being an extrovert and learning through other people. So I'm more of an ambivert.
Okay.
And I would say you can learn from other people through so many different ways. And so it's great. If it's not the conversation, I've even pulled up people's LinkedIn profiles and just seen what certifications did they get, what education did they have, what courses have they recently gone to. And I'm in the middle of this right now because I want to learn about sustainability and nonprofit management. So I just Googled conservation leaders, and I've been looking at what they do, and I put it in an Excel sheet. And I go research those programs. Something sounds great, I don't have the time for the meetings right now. Right. We just went over that with the meeting-free days. But even if you're an introvert, you can still learn from people who are already doing what you want to do. So it's awesome. There's so many ways to do that.
Question about moving from fixed mindset to growth mindset, which I have made that transition for sure. I believe that I grew up with a very strong fixed mindset. No discredit to my parents, right? But that was the way I kind of grew up. It was all about getting good grades in school, right? And if you didn't, that was not good. If you did, and I did, luckily, right? And I got into the school I wanted to go to. But I think I quit a lot of things early in my life because I wasn't very good at it. And with that fixed mindset, we either believe we're good at something or we're not, right? And if we're not good at something, like, might as well go do something else, right? So after I read the book Mindset, New Psychology of Success by Dr. Carol Dweck from Stanford, it absolutely changed my life. And I wrote about it in my book. Shifted to more of a growth mindset. And the huge shift there is being willing to try new things all the time and not really being afraid of failure anymore. I used to be terrified of failure and rejection, absolutely terrified. And it doesn't, I mean, there's always that, like, oh, what if I try this and it fails? But I see it more now as a learning opportunity, everything, right? Like, if, you invite me to come speak in this booth with you, there's not a thought of like, oh no, what if that goes wrong? Like, let's just go do it and see what happens, right? And people could benefit from it, no matter who shows up, how many people show up. It's a big shift, right? And there's a lot of people out there. I was never really a perfectionist, right? But a lot of people are, right? Yeah. And that's okay. Like, there's certain things and aspects of business that we need to get right. But I think people hide behind it all the time. And it's what it really is. It's fear, right? It's fear of being rejection. It's fear of failure. And it holds us back from not trying new things or making progress in certain areas. And so that was a big revelation for me. Operating with a growth mindset has allowed me to try so many different things. I mean, starting multiple podcasts, hosting a virtual summit, hosting an actual conference, publishing a book, starting a membership community. And those are the things that worked. Like, I've tried a lot of other things that didn't work, and that's totally fine because it's all in my experience and what I've noticed along the way, because we talk about fear, like fear of rejection, fear of judgment, or fear of failure. The other big one is fear of judgment. We always think, if I try this thing and it doesn't work out, then everybody's going to judge me and laugh at me, right? Like, what if we do this thing right now and I say something stupid and then David's like, oh, that was dumb, and then he's going to go tell everybody here and they're all going to be laughing. Like, we go to this place in our mind and like nothing is further.
I made people laugh.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, people know who I am. That's great. Yeah. And yeah, right. It was so good publicity, right? I was just listening to this interview this week with Bill Rasmussen, the founder of ESPN, the guy who started ESPN. He was telling these stories, and he said they started it in 1979. And it was like a couple of years later, they were actually named in a divorce in Texas, like for the first time. Like, typical man is just watching sports like around the clock, and the wife is like, I can't be with you anymore, and names them in the divorce. And it got to them in Connecticut, and the attorney is like, oh no, what are we going to do? And the PR person is like, we got to tell everybody about this. Like, this is good for our brand. So it's just like, you want that messaging out there. But, we go to that fear that everybody's going to be laughing at us, but really nobody notices. They see us trying stuff and they admire us for that, right? And rarely do people go back and go, oh my God, I can't believe you didn't succeed in that, right? They just admire you for trying. And so I'm a big advocate of just trying stuff, right? Growth mindset. There is no failure. There's only learning and growth. And as long as you do learn from it and you're able to keep trying. I mean, obviously, things don't work out the way we planned sometimes. I've had many of those, right? But just trying to learn and grow and keep getting better every day.
I love how you've explored your fears. I think that's like moving from fixed to growth, just like kind of extracting some bits from there. It's like if people are really looking at, well, what's behind your fear of it? Is it a fear of judgment? Is it a fear of failure? And then what's that about?
I analyze that stuff
right?
Crazy.
Like,
I love it.
And then that's usually where my mindset shifts, happen, because it's like I ask myself, like, well, what am I really afraid of happening?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, what's really the worst that could happen?
Yeah.
And then that's so bad.
Yeah, I've done so many things I was afraid of because I analyzed that and said, I got to do it anyway. I adopted a mantra from, I don't know if you've heard of Grant Cardone. He has a bunch of books in like this kind of sales space, and he has a book called The 10X Rule. And in that book, he talked about how fear festers and grows the longer you let it go there, right? So what he said is you got to starve your fears. Like, as soon as you recognize it, you just got to take action right away. So I just adopted that and started doing that right away. A friend of mine, Bennett Phillips, got me a t-shirt that says "Starve Your Fears," and if I see something and I'm like, oh, I'm terrified of that, it probably means I need to go try to do it. Now, sometimes we're afraid of things for good reason, right? But most of the time, it's irrational.
Well, thank you so much, Andy. This has been, I think it's such a great note to leave us on, because again, I just feel like the more boldness, and this has kind of been a theme with the speakers at our booth, but the kind of boldness and courage that we can keep bringing into ourselves, trusting ourselves to be able to do these kinds of transformations and pivots, huge. So just own your career, own your life. Talent development think tank, amazing community, amazing podcast. Check out Andy Storch, and thank you so much.